right. So my name is Dean, and I'm the co-owner of Cabbage Throw Farm. Organic vegetables are our specialty and our sole focus. And I operate this farm alongside my fiance, Emily. Our farm is located in Upper Hardin County, New Jersey, which is situated in the very western part of the state. So we're at the same latitude as New York City. We're just due west by about an hour. We're actually only 10 or 15 miles from the Delaware River and from the state border with Pennsylvania. So that should give you a good idea of where we're growing. And we rent a little under 3 acres, with 1.5 acres of that in actual bare ground production. And I think it's important to note that we are renting our space from another market farm, Comeback Farm, which is a 40-acre organic fruit and vegetable farm that's owned and operated by a longtime farming pioneer, Mark Canwright. And Mark's been growing since the age of 14. He started his operation with his father in 1974. So I just wanted to give him a shout out. And our collaboration with Comeback Farm, it's definitely been like a defining aspect, given that we operate together as kind of a loose cooperative in the sense that we're sharing markets and customers and workspaces and a fair bit of equipment. So our farm is situated in a very fertile river valley. Our soils are really prime soils. They're loose and loamy and very well draining. And we have just been very lucky to have unknowingly found great vegetable ground to start our business. So we're located in agricultural hardiness zone 6A. And I usually like to think that we're actually at the upper end of the mid-Atlantic growing region. And so we get a taste for all 4 seasons, but we don't get the extremities for any one of those seasons. So our sales, they're equally divided between 2 strong farmers markets. We attend one on Saturday, and then we attend another farmers market on Sunday. And then we also operate a small 35-member market style CSA. And the distribution point for that CSA are those 2 weekend farmers markets. So really our CSA is just an add-on to those markets and really just serves as, a way for us to more deeply engage with certain clientele. And it helps us to build a core group of customers that support our farm. So both markets operate year-round, although, I wouldn't call us winter growers by any means. Our infrastructure is, it's kind of limited. And so, we haven't fully dove into winter growing just yet. We do, however, grow a wide variety of storage routes, and that allows us to attend our markets year-round and have something to offer our customers in those late winter months of February and March. So to sum it up, we're just really a classic market garden style farm, using the 30-inch bed model and managing everything with the typical small scale tools and equipment that have become quite iconic to small farms our size, the BCS and the tilther, cat tunnels, tarps. We're putting down heavy compost applications. And we broke ground 5 years ago. That was in the summer of 2017. And we just finished up our 4th season of sales. And I should also mention that our labor force consists of just Emily, myself, and then this last season we had 1 full-time employee that started in April and finished up around Thanksgiving. And she really helped, just bring balance and helped us offset our workload. So, that's us. So I just wanted to start this thing off talking about seed germ specifics, because I feel that this is really the first big challenge that growers are going to have to fully tackle before switching over to a paper chain system. And this is an area on our farm that took a lot of trial and error. And so I like to encourage growers to, to first figure out a solid seed starting system that works for them before switching over to paper chains, because there's definitely an accrued cost associated with repeated germination failures, and the cost of paper chains are only going to accentuate those losses even more. So you need to keep that in mind. And if you take a look at the picture on the right, we are simply using heat mats. They're ready heat mats, and they're set out on wire racks, and we use that to germinate most of our crops. This system works particularly well with seeds that are fairly easy and pretty quick to germinate. Brassicas are a great example of this. It also works well on lettuces, on chicories, beans, peas, and allium crops. And you can also use the system to propagate seeds that need light in order to germinate, such as celery. And as you can see in this picture, we place plastic propagation domes over top our trays, and that holds in the heat and moisture really well. And the domes also serve as a form of rodent protection. And our heat mats are housed in an insulated garage, and that garage keeps a fairly constant and moderate temperature. And so this system works well for us both in, late winter as well as in summer. So we also use a homemade germination chamber in tandem with our heat mats. We use the germ chamber to propagate more challenging seeds, such as beets, spinach, chard, cilantro, and parsley. And it's not too hard to find plans and instructions on how to build a simple germ chamber. Ours really only has two components. It's essentially just a cheap crock pot that we bought from Target, and we plug that crock pot into an Inkbird temp controller, which we bought online through Amazon. And by using the heat mat and the germ chamber together, we have really been able to achieve rock solid germination on most crops. And that has really allowed us to become, more reliable and confident farmers. I also just wanted to quickly mention how in love we are with the DIBBLER and drop seeder system. It's been one of those game changers for us. It's super quick and very straightforward and easy to use. It's also way more pleasant and way less noisy to use than a vacuum seeder setup. There's no cords and hoses in the way while you're working. And so it's just a clutter-free, clean, neat tool. And so on our farm, we're typically seeding around 40 to 50 trays per week. And we're doing this as a two-person team in a single afternoon. And so, we estimated it, and the math comes to around 6 to 7 minutes. We can seed a tray from, filling the tray to dropping the seed to watering it. I just really strongly feel that the drop seeder is really what rounds out the pot's efficiency, even more than just, the quick transplanting out of trays into the field. Okay, so once you have a reliable seed starting system, you're now going to want to get a good understanding of how much time those trays are going to be spending in your nursery area. And you're going to want to be able to gauge when your trays are going to need to go into the ground and be planted. And systematizing these timings is really going to help you to better align your bed succession and turnover schedule with what's actually happening in your nursery. And it's going to bring those two areas on your farm in sync with one another, so your trays always have a place to go and get planted into. And if you're operating on a small acreage, and space is limited and your timings are really tight, then you're going to have to pay attention to this more. Um, the individual cells of the paper chains, they're fairly small and shallow, and they're much less forgiving than plug flats. And so you can't as easily delay planting and hold on to your propagation trays while garden space is being made available. So you're really going to have to stay on top of your nursery and ensure that you're getting your seedlings into the ground on time and at their most optimal stage. So as a general rule, we have found that it's almost always better to transplant seedlings when they are still relatively young. So the earlier the better is a great guiding mantra when experimenting with different timings. And we use root growth as our main indicator of when to plant out a tray. So we're always looking at the undersides of our trays to see how the roots are developing, because we know that once the roots hit the bottoms of the trays, they're going to quickly start to entangle and mat up with the roots of their neighbors. And this is really what you're trying to avoid. You're trying to get your trays into the ground before that mat has an opportunity to form. And if you let trays over mature, it's only going to bite you in the end, because it's going to make running the paper pot that much more difficult, and you're ultimately going to have to slow down to entangle and deal with that root mat problem. Another hidden benefit of this early planting strategy is that it's really just allowed us to get by with a much smaller nursery space than we would have otherwise needed if we were to let our seedlings mature out over a longer period of time. We're really only holding on to a 2 to 3 week supply of trays at once, and we're just simply relying on that quick turnover to free up space in our nursery tables and our benches. And limiting the size of your nursery operation, it can be a strategic move in multiple ways. One is that it's going to shorten the amount of time you're spending on greenhouse watering, but also two, you might not have enough working capital to put up a larger and more modern structure, especially when you're first starting out, or maybe you're renting land on a short-term lease and you don't want to put in the time and effort to put up a semi-permanent greenhouse, which you're only going to have to deconstruct in a season or two. And so, and that's our case. We just don't know how long we're going to be on this farm. And so we didn't want to make that investment. But really, you're going to get by fine with limited infrastructure, like a simple cat tunnel, or even just tables out on your driveway and lawn. All right. And this is especially if you're moving a limited number of trays quickly through your greenhouse. All right. So in his book, The Lean Farmer, Ben Hartman has a great chapter titled Paperpot Magic, which is another great learning resource covering the paperpot system in its entirety. I highly recommend you read that book, especially that chapter if you're looking into the system. So in that chapter, Ben Hartman writes that growers should really view the Paperpot Transplanter as a tool that allows for the direct seeding of pre-sprouted seed as opposed to transplanting. And, we've really taken that statement seriously on our farm. And it's almost to the point where, the Paperpot Transplanter has almost entirely replaced our direct seeder. And we really now only directly sow our baby salad green products. And this might seem a bit extreme or maybe too expensive, but I can't stress what an unfair advantage it is to be able to, take germination completely out of the field and back under the complete control of a propagation room. And for one, you're never going to get pushed out of the field from rain. And so your seedings will always remain on time and on schedule, especially when used in combination with silage tarps to keep your plots dry. And this in turn will keep your harvest plan on schedule. And you will also entirely eliminate the risk of germination failures associated with bad weather and extreme seasonal temperatures. And so in essence, your planting systems become almost completely risk-free and predictable, which is going to do wonders for your mental health and for your business. Also, transplanting out most of your crops. One thing it's done for us is it's streamlined and simplified our seed ordering, procedures, and it's just made it less scary and way more accurate to figure out how much seed we're going to need for that season. Not to mention that you can get by with far fewer seeds than would be needed if crops were to be direct sown. We used to find it much more difficult to predict our seed usages, both pre and post planting. And this is when we were sowing everything directly. And, and this was especially true when we were trialing and changing between different seed rollers and spacing calibrations. And what would frequently happen is, we would plant way more seed than we initially estimated. And then we'd get discouraged because, we ran out of seed midway through a planting and miss out on that time window that we were trying to hit. And, another thing we used to do is we would order 30% more seed as an insurance measure of when we were direct sowing. And then we'd carry over an insane excess of seed, which would just lose its viability over time in storage. So I kind of like to credit the Paperpot Transplanter with helping us to cut our seed bill in half, even though we're producing much more vegetables than we ever have. So I wanted to give you all a quick overview of the 5 different stages of plant growth that we're using on our farm as a general guideline for when certain crops should be about ready for transplanting. And like I mentioned a few slides back, root growth should really be your first and most absolute indicator of when to plant out a tray. We're mostly placing our crops into these categories or these separate stages based on that crop's root sensitivities and or its rate of development. So just keep that in mind as we go through these. So I also translated these stages out into the number of days and weeks from seeding to transplanting to help with counting down and planting out a field transplanting schedule. And it's important to note that these 5 stages should, you should interpret them in a very rough sense, and you should just be using them as a general guide to what is possible and what has worked for us in our context. You're definitely going to have to and want to experiment and venture out on your own here to find your own preferences. All right, so let's quickly run through them. The first stage is the pre-germination stage. So, planting out your trays before the seeds actually germinate. And carrots are really the only crop we will transplant before the seeds fully sprout. And we're going to circle back to carrot specifics on the next slide over. The second stage here is post-germination, or really just as soon as your trays have fully sprouted. The cotyledon leaves of your plants may have not even had time to fully unfold yet, as is the case with a few of those bean plants pictured in the very bottom right. The third stage is when plants have fully developed cotyledon leaves, and they may even be getting ready to send out their first set of true leaves. You might see, that true leaf bud hanging out the base of those cotyledon leaves, waiting to come up. And this can be anywhere between 1 to 2 weeks after seeding. And then, once those true leaves are fully up, we are then in the 4th transplanting stage. And then the 5th and last stage encompasses crops we allow to reach a maturity of around 3 to 4 weeks. So as I mentioned earlier, carrots are really the only crop we transplant before the trays have fully germinated. We used to transplant our carrots more in the past, when we still struggled to get predictable germination in the field. For us, we never had a problem getting a nice stand of direct seeded carrots in spring. But then come summer, we'd find it much more difficult. And we'd always end up with, just terrible stands that yielded well below our harvest targets. And so, yeah, we began experimenting with transplanting and immediately saw decent results. And so we kept going with it. And it's still a trick that we lean on at certain times of the year, mainly winter. So with paper pot carrots, you should be planting them in the pre-germ stage to avoid disturbing that carrot taproot, which is highly susceptible to forking. Most customers are used to seeing a long straight carrot. And so you definitely don't want to lose a potential sale because, yeah, you've got wacky looking carrots. But with that said, it's much better to have forked carrots than to not have carrots at all. People are still going to buy your carrots as long as the bunches are looking fresh and clean. And your stack is well presented at market. So transplanting carrots, it mimics stale seeding in the field where it's all about getting your timing right. We're usually propagating the trays out on heat mats set between 70 to 75 degrees. And then we'll schedule a twice a day checking on those trays around 7 days after seeding. And, carrots don't usually come up in unison. And so we'll just wait for 15 to 20% of the tray to emerge before planting. And it's important to note that you should already have your field fully prepped and ready to receive the trays, so planting is not delayed. So in that picture on the right, it's showing an early crop of transplanted carrots that are still in the process of emerging. If you can see, there's perfect 2-inch spacing here, and you can see how this row is neither too thin nor too overly crowded. And so these carrots are going to mature at a nice steady rate, and they're going to have plenty of room to breathe. We used to seed our rows more heavily in the past at around a 1/2 to 1-inch spacing in row, but then we'd struggle with various foliar diseases down the line. So we prefer using raw seed, mainly because it's less expensive than buying pelleted. And as you can see in the picture, we're okay with dropping multiple seeds per cell, and we won't come back to thin out our plantings. You can also totally use pelleted carrot seed, especially if you're looking to singulate your seed drop. Maybe you're looking for an increase in airflow, or maybe you're trying to grow a larger carrot quicker, for your markets. So the biggest drawback with transplanting carrots is definitely the extra cost associated with the paper chains and the extra potting soil. This expense can add up very quickly, especially as your carrot plantings grow larger. In the earlier years of our farm, we would really only plant 1 to 2 beds of carrots at a time, which is why transplanting works so well for us. But in this last season, our average carrot planting was around 6 beds. And we also did a full 12 bed planting going into fall and winter. And so, that's made it much less feasible to continue with paper potting. And so now, we're really only transplanting our earliest crop of carrots, which we're seeding the first week in February and transplanting out into an unheated caterpillar tunnel. And this is another huge advantage of the paper pot, which applies not only to carrots, but also to other early direct seeded crops as well. And that's the ability to plant out seedlings in late winter when temperatures are still extremely cold and germination is painfully slow given those low soil temps. Our well pump is still off at that time of year. We don't even have access to water in our field. And therefore, direct seeding of any crop is just not an option for us. And so the paper pot, it gives us the ability to get crops into the ground much earlier so we can get that head start needed to stay competitive in our markets. And that's the reason I look so proud and happy in that picture to the right. It's because it was taken on May 6th, just before the start of our main season markets. And around here in the mid-Atlantic, everyone's first planting of field carrots aren't usually ready until at least June, and more accurately, mid-June. And so we were able to bring our carrots to market, 3 to 4 weeks earlier than, other field-based farmers using the transplanter, in combination with the tunnel. This picture is also showing what a crop of transplanted carrots can look like. You can definitely see some that are forked and slightly crooked, but for the most part, no, these carrots should earn passing grade from your customers and they should sell. All right, so now let's get back to the various nursery timings and planting stages. And I'm going to cover the post-germination and the cotyledon stages together here because they're both great timings for transplanting crops that are usually thought to be direct sown. And it's in these two stages where we should circle back to Ben Hartman's advice, which is to think of the transplanter as a tool which allows us to direct seed, pre-spread seed. So the crops I have listed in the post-germination category they're more sensitive to transplant shock than the others. The roots of these crops hate to be disturbed, and so you really need to get them in the ground as soon as possible, and usually within the same week of them being seeded. A few examples of this include red and French breakfast radish, and Hakurei turnips, beans, peas, and edamames, so all the legumes. And then the cotyledon stage, it encompasses crops that are a little less sensitive to shock, but should still be planted out early to avoid disturbing their taproot. And this mainly applies to storage roots, primarily those in the Brassica family, such as daikon, watermelon radish, and purple top turnips. And we also lump beets into this category to prevent leaf spot from forming in our nursery trays, which frequently happens in our late summer plantings. All right. So here's a video of us transplanting bok choy in the cotyledon stage. And I know that bok choy wasn't one of the crops in our list that I previously mentioned, but we found that, pretty much any brassica crop can also be planted out early with any negative impact to the crop. So what that looks like. And while we are on the subject of storage roots, I thought it'd be a good time to just quickly mention, while we're on the topic of what crops do well when planted in the cotyledon stage, I thought we'd just talk about storage roots. Because, for us, the Paperpot system has been a foolproof method for planting out these crops. And, we're using forage chains on most of our roots. And hey, Diego, sorry, man.
Yeah. So post-germination, 3 to 4 days, that means 3 to 4 days after you see it come above the soil surface.
Sometimes not. Yeah, kind of. So like I mentioned, it's once the trays are just fully up, it's like, it's go time. It's like, let's get these things into the field.
Yep.
It's like, but we'll let the whole tray come up because sometimes, sometimes like just the center tray will come up and then we'll put it on our greenhouse. We'll wait another 24 hours, 48 hours, and then the whole tray will come up. And then it's like, okay, let's get this into the ground as soon as possible. And that's kind of what I meant by it.
Got it. So it's more visually making sure the whole tray's up, not like, hey, we're 3 or 4 days, we're going regardless of what's up.
Yeah. I mean, for radish and Hakurei are like a great example of what we'll do. We'll do all of our seeding on Tuesday, and brassicas just take 2 days to germinate. And so, they're up by Thursday. And then we're kind of like looking like, can we plant these after market on our Saturday? If we don't get an opportunity Saturday, can we do it on Sunday? But we won't wait until, the following Thursday to plant them. You could, but that's what we're trying to avoid.
Do you ever have any issues with burying them too deep or too shallow at that stage? Because the plants are so small that, like smaller plants, typically more fragile, given the environment, whether really cold or really hot. Do you ever see any issues with transplants surviving given climate because they're so small?
We've actually seen the opposite. So like the more we let plants mature, the more susceptible they're going to be to transplant shock. And
Okay.
that's kind of what I wanted to mention in this whole kind of presentation was we found the earlier the better with almost everything, especially with the things that I just mentioned, because almost all of these, they're storage roots and they all have a big tap root. And so, we've seen them, they're going to take to the soil the less that you disturb that tap root. But if, say it's like daikon radish and we're holding onto that tray for 2 weeks, it's kind of like a bit of a setback if you're letting that root kind of form in the tray and then you're cutting the root while you're paper potting. Right. And so for us, we're just like, let's get these things in ASAP. And at first that was just kind of like that approach. It was more just like, it was kind of a feeling. I was like, I feel like these things want to get in as soon as possible. But then we started noticing, they would wilt less. It kind of almost feel like the cotyledon leaves are like more thicker than the true leaves almost.
Right.
So because we're using wobblers, we can just soak everything right after planting, and we don't have much issue. So yeah.
What about another thing I could see people asking is, I think people assume that a larger plant obviously is going to have more root mass. More root mass keeps the plant and the soil intact inside the cell of the chain. When you're planting a tiny seedling, there's not a lot of root mass there. Do you ever have any issues with the soil just coming out of the cell?
No, definitely not. We take a lot of care to kind of pack in the soil. That's like one thing with filling the trays, that's the only thing that's kind of going to be slower than if you're filling a plug flat tray. We'll definitely we've taken this from Connor Crickmore, but we'll just like rub in the soil and kind of pack it down. And we'll take the time to make sure that the soil is, nice and packed tightly. And so when you're transplanting out the tray, the soil is for us, we use Vermont compost and that stuff kind of holds together. And so when we're transplanting out the tray, the soil is not falling out of the bottom of the cell, nor is it like bouncing out. And it's also kind of like why we like the paper pot is because, I used to hate having to like wait for the roots to have to fill out that plug flat. Right. With this, like, it's so much more convenient. Like just having like our schedule, like if I want to see family, and I can like pre-plant them. I don't have to wait. Or, if I have a busy week coming up, I'll just like plant them out earlier. Or the problem is you can't hold on to them, at least. Well, you can, but there's a lot more problems associated with holding on to them, at least for us. So, I hope that answers your question.
It does. The other thing I noticed in there is you don't have closing fins on the transplanter. You're just using the press wheels on the back. Is that what you found to be successful in your soil?
Yeah, we did that year one, and we kind of never looked back. I actually don't even know where those fins are, but I always wanted to make sure that the chains were being planted at either like soil level or deeper than soil level. It would drive me crazy if we had like a partially exposed chain. And, I felt that by taking off those fins, we can plant it deep. And because the transplanter is not pushing soil and ridging it up towards the plant, it allows you to go deeper.
Right.
And then the soil, because we're using collinear hose to weed everything, soil does get pushed up into it all the time. So, the problem is the only thing is you're going to have like a soft seed bed because, you're going to want the soil to kind of like, settle in and kind of, just like settle in with gravity.
Sure.
If you have like a really hard soil, it's just going to trench it and kind of like plate up, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it won't flow as naturally.
Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes we try to get it like, well, the surface of the soil will be compressed because we've been walking on it. And, we'll try to just skip a step, and it doesn't work. You definitely need to at least tilth it or harrow it, or however you're doing your bed prep, at least giving, a 2-inch looseness to the soil before coming in with the paper pot. So,
yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Like, I totally get why you do that. No, it's an interesting little discovery you made there.
Yeah, I mean, we love it. Again, we have really like loamy soil, so our soil just, it's dynamite. So should I?
Yeah, you can pick back up in the presentation here.
Okay. All right. So I'm just going to start off with storage roots again. Okay. So, while we're talking about crops that transplant well in the cotyledon stage, I just really want to highlight that the transplanter can be a foolproof method for growing roots for both fresh bunching and winter storage. And its strength comes from the fact that you can perfectly space out your plants and achieve uniform crop stands, that mature evenly, quickly, and in good health, given your seedlings have ample room to grow. And, you can see the spacing I'm talking about in that lower center picture showing our crop of purple daikon. And, that upper picture, it's showing, what our root display kind of looks like at market, 3 months out of the year when we're offering them fresh with their tops intact. And, we're using 4-inch chains on most of our root crops, and we're planting them out at 3 rows on a 30-inch bed or 10 inches between those rows. You can also use a 6-inch chain if you're looking to give your plants more airflow, or if you're looking for a larger root. And, storage roots have been, an extremely important crop for us in recent years, mainly because they've given us the ability to, attend winter markets year round and have that year round cash flow, as well as, that year round interaction with our customers. And, I really like to think of storage roots as our primary CSA sales force during those months of January, February, and March. And it's mainly because, your market booth is going to be so much more approachable even if you just have a small diversity of winter products to offer people at that time. And so, as you're selling the kohlrabi and the watermelon radish and the beets, you can also be pre-selling memberships for the coming season and maintain, that more steady cash flow, which, is a key ingredient to a strong financial statement, which is going to be more important in the later stages of your farm as you're chasing down, different financing and loan options and to help push your business to the next level. So as I mentioned before, brassicas can definitely be planted in the cotyledon stage, but we feel that 2 to 3 weeks is their most optimal timing. Brassica plants are definitely very resilient. And so you could even hold onto your trays longer if you needed to, but it's much better to transplant them out on the young side. And besides brassicas, herbs such as cilantro and dill are also good planting candidates here. And then in our final timing is a list of crops that we allow to mature, up to 3 to 4 weeks old. Parsley and fennel and alliums, these all hold very well in a tray. This is a little less so with lettuces and chicories, which should be planted out within at least 4 weeks of seeding. So, I just wanted to note that for one, we don't paper pot full-size lettuce heads anymore due to issues we've had with bottom rot. So instead, we plant our lettuces into landscape fabric to keep the undersides off the soil. But we're still paper potting our spring mix and our little gem lettuces, however. All right, so in this last slide, I just wanted to list off all the crops that have performed well for us in paper chain pots. And I have them listed under our preferred chain sizes for reference. So yeah, and this is a preference that is definitely going to be different from farm to farm, but I just thought I'd share what we do so you can get yet another perspective. All right. So yeah, just hope this was helpful. And if anyone has any questions, you're more than welcome to reach out to us via email. We're at cabbagethrowfarm@gmail.com or DM us on Instagram.
Thanks so much for doing this, Dean. Really appreciate it. A couple follow-up questions. One,
yeah,
you showed if you go back one slide there to the chains with the preferred crops for each size. When you say like those crops fall into those categories, like why you would say tatsoi is better in 6 than 4? I think a lot of newer farmers, they struggle with what chain size do I use. So what do you say is really the criterion that says, okay, a crop is better in this spacing versus that? Is it health of crop? Is it size of crop? What is it?
It's both. Yeah, it's both those things. Mostly it's health of crop for us. For us, most of our plantings are in the field. And so, out here in the East, we have a lot of humidity issues in the field. And so I kind of try to imagine what the crop is going to be like at full maturity. And I want to give it that room. So its canopy is just touching when I think it's at the stage that I want to cut it at and I want to harvest it at. So, with tatsoi, like we'll bump it into a 4-inch chain. It just depends. Maybe I'm like, say it's late fall and I'm running out of time and I know I'm not going to get that tatsoi to full size. I'll throw it in a 4-inch chain and I'll just know I'll cut it younger. And another thing we've actually kind of had trouble with the 6-inch chains. Just the increased length between each cell, they'll kind of like flip over and they'll kind of like tangle up and flip over before they actually get trenched in. But with the 2-inch chains and the 4-inch chains, like that happens less. And so we kind of had just less problems with the 4-inch chains. So like we were noticing a lot of people were using the 6-inch chains, but we're like, let's just go 3 rows and go closer in the row, but give each row more space. And it's worked for us. Again, it's based on all preference. A lot of times I do feel like, with purple top turnips, like 4 inches, the canopy is kind of crowded, but you still get like a nice baseball sized turnip. It's just at the end, the leaves are gonna yellow a little bit, but I'm kind of okay with that because I'll get 1 or 2 weeks of fresh bunching out of that planting, and then I'll just I'll harvest out the roots and I'll store them away. So I hope that helps.
Sure.
Yeah, and then all the ones in the 2-inch chains, a lot of those are they're really crops that you would directly seed and kindly tightly space anyway, and so it just makes sense for them to be in 2-inch chains. But
do you have a standard row spacing or number of rows per bed? Like you mentioned 3 rows per bed, say in the 4-inch where they're closer together. Like, do you do everything in 3 rows per bed, or is it kind of vary?
Yeah. So most of the things are going to be in 3 rows, 4 rows. Yeah. 3 rows and 4 rows, just with the Paperpot system. So we only use those 2 configurations. We're not trying to get 5 rows in there. It's just too tight for us. But the only time we do more than 4 rows is when we're direct seeding. But besides that, and we're actually looking to like mechanize our cultivation a little more. We're thinking about getting some piece of equipment that's going to like force us to only we're looking at potentially moving over to just a 3-row setup to just a mechanized cultivation. Cause this was like the first year that weeds kind of got away from us. And so we're like, okay, we need to, fix out more. but that's the only reason why I see you would standardize the number of rows in a bed is for cultivation purposes, or if you just want to make it simple for training employees. But we have a pretty small crew, so either me or Emily is always with our employee if we're transplanting. Yeah.
Yeah, well, right on. A lot of great stuff in here. I think this will help a lot of people. Thanks again for sharing. And if people have more questions, look you guys up on Instagram.